They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
Well, welcome everyone to our first podcast of Taking the Comments to Isengard. My name is Samuel, and with me I also have Aaron. Aaron, why don't you go ahead and say hi?
Hey, everybody.
And today we are jumping into our first podcast. We wanted to be able to just start off a podcast that has to do with everything Lord of the Rings, everything Hobbit, Middle-earth, and Tolkien stuff in general. And because we're just big nerds. Aaron, the thing is, I follow you on Instagram, and so I get to see all the memes that you post, and they're gold. They're just absolutely gold. Like I just love like all the ones, especially that have to do with like how Pippin gets or Gandalf gets mad at Pippin all the time. Those are all those memes are fantastic. But
those just speak to our soul,
right? Yeah. But today we wanted to jump in with our first topic, and we wanted to be able to, with this podcast, go into certain topics of Tolkien, of the Tolkien world, of the Tolkien universe, and be able to expound and extrapolate certain topics. And today we wanted to jump in with none other than the Hobbits, the life of Hobbits. And so we actually have some questions here. And the first one I want to do is, like, why are Hobbits so compelling? Like, I mean, because seriously, like, I got into Lord of the Rings, Aaron, specifically first from the from the music. And the first thing that just pulled me in immediately when I was studying during college and stuff like that was actually the Hobbit theme. And there's just something so amazing about it. And then seeing how that, when I watched the Lord of the Rings for the first time with like, I want to be interested in these movies, then the Hobbits are just such compelling characters from the get-go when you see that innocence. But why do you think that they're so compelling as characters, as a race?
Yeah, that's the grand question. I think that anybody who has watched the movies enough or read the books enough really looks into, because there's something that Gandalf obviously sees. He picked Bilbo, he picked Frodo, essentially both of them at different times to save Middle-earth. And yeah, that's a great question. I think that there's something about them where they are these simple, hardworking people who they're not really looking for any quests. They're not really looking for trouble. But they're not really looking for any fame. They're just kind of doing their thing. But with both Bilbo and Frodo, and you could go on like Sam and Merry, all four of them at least have kind of exhibited this call to duty, and they kind of embraced like protecting others and doing the greater good. And there's definitely times where they're really klutzy, or they drop things, or just sometimes they get in really bad situations because they're so clumsy and because they don't know any better. And all of them are usually way too scared to actually embark on the journey, but there's something within them that pulls them to help, that pulls them to that good. And yeah, so that's something that I've always really been intrigued by, is that even if they don't really want to, they're kind of scared, they're really drawn to this service and to helping. So I know that's something that I've never necessarily really heard talked about before, but that's something that I've always thought about, was how, you could get Gandalf with Bilbo. It took him a couple days to convince him, and then like Bilbo became a hero.
Yeah.
Frodo was looking for it a little bit more, but again, took him a little bit of convincing, became a hero. And none of them were looking for it. They just returned back to their simple lives and did their simple hobbies afterward, so yeah.
Well, absolutely. And like that sense of duty is so cool, because it's also coupled with their innocence. I think the Hobbits in general are just seen as such innocent, such an innocent race, almost like children, actually in the books, they're described as having a childlike innocence as well. And then when you see particularly Frodo, I think Bilbo also has a little bit of that childlike innocence too. And you see that a lot in his character, but I think Frodo especially. And then I think they maybe played it up a little bit during the movies, but that's okay. Cause I mean, just kind of, I think it just deepens the point. You see how in the Council of Elrond, in the Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo's like, I will take the ring to Mordor. Like you see him seeing all these other adults fighting, they're all just like bashing heads of like what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And like, you do this, you can't be trusted. And then Gimli's just yelling, never trust an elf. And he's just over there spitting. But then you have Frodo coming forward saying, I will take the ring to Mordor. And then he's driven by this idea of, I don't know why, but I need to do this. This needs to happen. And if nobody else is going to come to the front in order to be able to do this, then I need to. And it's almost like a child, because if you think about how children sometimes they want to please their parents, and so they'll go and do like these different things of duty, especially like a firstborn child will go like, no, Dad, no, Mom, I'm going to do this because I want you to, as my authority, to be pleased and to see my worth. And it's almost a little bit of that you see in Frodo. Like he's like almost like this thing to Gandalf and Elrond. I will do this because this is something that I need to do for the greater good, and also this is something I need to do because it will be pleasing to the people that are expecting something of me. And so, the innocence also is a huge factor. That is something that I really enjoy, and especially when you see it an overall Hobbit life, just like going through Hobbiton and seeing how they're just fat and sassy or whatever you want to call it, like they're just happy in Hobbiton, just farming, eating pastries and just so blissfully ignorant, if you will. I love that about Hobbits.
I agree. And I think that even just like to expand on like that innocence concept for a minute, I think that that's partially maybe why Gandalf chose them, well, sorry, I'll refrain. Gandalf didn't choose Bilbo to be a ring bearer, but Gandalf chose Frodo, to help be a ring bearer. And I think he saw that innocence. Maybe he didn't know it before he met Bilbo, but obviously Bilbo exemplified across the journey that he could be someone who could be trusted with literally unlimited power. And yeah, I think that I think it's pretty hard to not be that innocent and carry something of unlimited power and not try to do something to get away with it. Mm-hmm. So,
absolutely. That's a great point to make. And, but I mean, they're just such compelling characters. And, I really enjoy how The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings has them front and center, because then it makes this idea of almost like a child going on an adventure. And then you're able to see like this idea of like how they're continuing to, develop and evolve and honestly mature. They go from this blissfully ignorant and innocent stage in the beginning of each book, both Bilbo and Frodo from Hobbit and Lord of the Rings respectively. And then by the end, they've become this matured and more understanding person. And it's just so cool. And how Tolkien uses those characters in order to show their arcs as development is amazing. But with that being said, though, hopping into our next question, in Lord of the Rings specifically, we only see hobbits as peaceful. And actually, if you go back to the Hobbit movies too, and even a little bit of the book, it shows hobbits being peaceful and, like I said before, blissfully ignorant of the world around them. Their history is somewhat crazy, though. They actually did come from some tumultuous times. And so how did they get to the point of innocence, of this blissful ignorance of the world around them, after all of the toils that they have endured in their past history?
Yeah, part of me wonders if that just has to do with so them being, through a lot of trials, through a lot of toils, kind of really being controlled by a lot of other individuals. Part of me wonders if, once they finally did get some peace, that they basically were like, all right, we've dealt with a lot of junk, and if we go over to Hobbiton and do our thing, and we just don't really do much communicating with anybody else, whether it's good or bad outside of Hobbiton, like we just do our thing, kind of like I said, the ignorance bliss. If we don't get our noses involved, maybe nobody else is going to come bully us or come control us anymore. So that's part of what I've thought, is it's a little bit of maybe trying to protect themselves, knowing that they're not really great warriors. And so if they get themselves involved in a war, or if they get themselves involved in a cause, it would not take very much to, overthrow them and control them and throw them into any kind of like slavery or something like that. So that's just my take. So I think that it's like ignorance is bliss, because we've seen what happens if we aren't. So what about you?
That's that's actually, I really appreciate that perspective. That's something that like I didn't even think about until you brought it up. So I think that was a very good point to make. And it actually reminds me, have you ever played the game Lord of the Rings Conquest? It was for the 360 PS3 generation of console.
That's one of the only ones that I haven't been able to, unfortunately.
It's so good. I actually own it, and my wife and I are trying to get around to play it, because I literally just introduced her to Lord of the Rings this past month. But in the game, you can when you're playing in multiplayer, actually not even just multiplayer. I think there's also an evil campaign, but you actually can go and fight in the Shire in Hobbiton, and then so you have the good versus evil, and then if you get a hero, so it's much like Star Wars Battlefront, that series. And if you get a hero, the hero is a Balrog, so you have these little tiny Hobbit archers going against this ginormous Balrog, and then you have this sword, and you're just going bam, bam, you're just like you're just killing hobbits. It's terrible, but it's funny.
Like no chance. Yeah.
Yeah, no chance at all. Oh my word. But that's a great game. Highly recommend it. But like coming back to the ideas of hobbits now being at the end of the Third Age and the events of Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, being blissfully ignorant of the world around them and just being such a peaceful people. The thing is, they actually came from. Actually, according to the knowledge of Tolkien lore that we know now, they actually don't know. There's really no specific origination or origin. There we go. Wow. Let's be actually real words. Let's use real words this time.
All right.
There's not a real origin known origin for the hobbits. Now they did come from somewhere, but people just don't know that. And Tolkien, it seems like he purposely made it ambiguous. And so, but they seem to have originated from the river of the Anduin, over by the Anduin area, and then from there they migrated out of the Anduin area, away from the Greenwood, which then became Mirkwood. They crossed the Misty Mountains, crossed over into Dunland and a lot of the northern region, which was actually under the king of Andor. And then they actually made an agreement with the man, the king of Andor, which was of the race of men, to actually then go and settle the Shire. And from there, that's when they really started establishing themselves as an individual race, and they kind of get lost in themselves. But they had to migrate through the Misty Mountains, which we see in the Hobbit trilogy and in the movies, and we also see in Lord of the Rings. It's mentioned, like, when you go through a mountain pass, it's no easy feat. It's not a simple thing to just go, oh, let's go tromping through the mountains. Like it's a pretty big deal. And then also it's speculated that they probably moved out of the Anduin area to begin with because of the looming evil that was Sauron starting to take over Greenwood, and so they were trying to get away from that. I mean, I honestly think that, now this is only my thoughts, but I think Tolkien probably used this as an opportunity to kind of show how humans can become complacent when not faced with any immediate danger. And then, and it really does show itself that way, because the hobbits actually were even said to have sent some of their archers into the final battle against Angmar before the Witch King of Angmar and his armies fled, and were beaten back. And so there's the thought that, they had some form of conflict, but then for hundreds of years they were just living like there's like everything's fine. And they had a couple of battles, but like they're just so they come to this point of where it seems like they're almost complacent. That blissful ignorance, that idea of everything's fine, everything's peaceful, like there's nothing to worry about, and they even purposefully keep their noses out of the affairs of big folk or tall people as they would call them. I think it's just a real show of like human complacency put into an entire race of people within Middle Earth, and I think it's a very compelling, another compelling part of their the characters to show, like, especially for Frodo and Bilbo, when they go out into the rest of the world, they realize, whoa, the events of what's going on out here in the rest of the world has a huge effect of what could happen back home. I need to make sure that I do something in order to be involved with this world. And one of the greatest lines from the movies, specifically Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, this movie, is when Meriadoc says to Treebeard, but you're a part of this world, like talking about you need to be involved. You can't just be you can't just be a bystander. If you're watching this happen, then you're allowing it to happen. You need to be a part of working against evil and fight complacency. I think it's just that's a very, very compelling character arc, especially because Merry and Pippin in the Fellowship of the Ring, they're so content with their Hobbit life. They're so content with just like laying back and like going and stealing Farmer Maggot's crop. But then in the Two Towers, you see them like, no, Merry specifically, you see him like, I need to take action. I need to work for the betterment of my friends, for the safety of my friends. And I really, Lord of the Rings it's just so good.
No, I agree. And I think, so there is a name for the character, but I don't remember it. But I always just thought it was captured so well at the very end of Return of the King in the movie, when everyone is coming back. They've been gone for a very long time, coming in on their horses, and I always have to laugh because there's that dude sweeping his deck off.
I thought you were gonna say him.
They've literally been disappeared for. I forgot how long they were gone, like a year or 9 months, but a very, nobody knew. Everyone just thought they were like dead or something, just gone. They just come walking in happily on their horses. Nobody knows that they basically just saved the world.
Right.
And that he's like sweeping his deck. They smile at him and he just like, looks at him and like just keeps sweeping his deck.
He scowls at him.
Yeah, he scowls and he turns around and just keeps sweeping. And he's like, I don't want to know what you were up to. Like,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I always thought that moment just captures like that ignorance is bliss. Like part of me, he's probably just a grumpy old man who doesn't really care. But part of me is like, well, maybe it's also part of the culture that they started to cultivate. Like, don't ask questions. Don't, they were gone for a year, but I'm not even going to ask because I don't care. So, yeah.
I think you're spot on. I forgot about that until you brought that up. Like, it makes perfect sense because that is the, like you said, the perfect encapsulation of the Hobbit mentality. And but yeah, I honestly do think that it's like complacency. They're 100% fine with living their own lives, and they just don't care about the world around them. But I also think that also has a part of why Tolkien even created this character to begin with. Our third question is, what do you think was Tolkien's reasoning for actually making these hobbits, and how does their culture and overall personality service the story of Middle Earth as a whole?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. So I'm going to answer the second part first. So I think that he put hobbits in because he wanted to, number one, show how anybody, even just your average hobbit, just hanging out, anybody can really, turn around and make a difference and make their contribution to to a greater good. So like in this case, the greater good was literally saving the world. But I mean, look at Frodo doing his contribution. You could look, like you said, it was Merry that had his speech with the tree, right? So there's
Merry.
Maybe Merry, like his whole character could have revolved around merely the fact that he was going to get there and convince Treebeard to fight. Because if Treebeard doesn't fight, well, Isengard could still be taken over, and factory keeps going. Who knows what happens? So So like that was his moment. And so like each Hobbit has his own moment where it's like they go from just being like an average person to understanding, what the purpose is, what they're there for, and they're like, I need to buy into this. Point being, I think that he made them to show that everybody can, even just the average Joe, if he looks hard enough and searches hard enough, like he can find his reason to a purpose he's like really, really digging for. So, but the first part of your question, yeah, I think that their culture and things like that just added a lot of good general diversity, and it brought something new because in a lot of like books and movies, it seems like every village or every community, is something super dysfunctional, and there's kind of big ruckus going on, and there are, but you don't see a ton of movies like this where the town is just peaceful and people just kind of do their thing. Like, usually there's like a bad villain in the town.
Yeah.
Or like people come and take over the town and then that's the plot. Like the plot of this is like it's a peaceful town and people don't really want to be rustled, And so I think that also brings some uniqueness to it.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree with you. Because like, if you look to another story, it's actually my wife's favorite movie of all time, and it's my favorite classic Disney film, is Beauty and the Beast. And when you look at Beauty and the Beast, it does begin in that that little town, that little quaint town. There's a whole song about little town, like the whole thing. And there's a whole song about it. So it's obviously an important part. But it is a peaceful, quaint town. But then you have Gaston, and he is the evil element in that town. And so, yeah, usually like the stories, they might have that peaceful town where everything might seem a little too perfect, but then there's also that little crack in the seams. Whereas Hobbiton is that little too perfect of a town, but it's not because there's an evil in the town. It's because there are outside powers that are trying to make their way in, rather than the town automatically having an evil within it. And it shows like an outer corruption. And so I like that. I like that model and that likening analogy that is there, because it's like the town itself, it's innocent. The hobbits are meant to be innocent, and then the outside world is supposed to be is trying to make its way in there to impact them. But then you have people like Gandalf that is literally trying to keep hobbits away from the rest of the world. Like he even says that he's trying to hide them away. He doesn't want the rest of the world to know about them, because he loves their innocence, their childlike innocence. And I think that was why, like, that's what they do to service a story, like you said, in order to be able to have these incredible character arcs and moments where they're like where individual hobbits are able to take their stake, make their moment within the history of all of Middle Earth, in order to be able to bring that innocence, that innocent, dutiful nature into a world that has already experienced corruption and darkness. Because like men are easily corrupted. Dwarves, like they separate themselves from everybody else because they're like, you're all on your own. And then elves are basically the last bastion of hope, but they're on their way out, And so like, who's this last form of innocence? It's the hobbits. And I think that's what services the story. But as far as why Tolkien made them, I think that he really wanted to have these little characters where it's like these little people can do a big feat. And honestly, I think he's actually even done in interviews and written in letters, like that was his purpose in making Frodo for Lord of the Rings, Bilbo for The Hobbit. He wanted to have these small, unsuspecting characters that are very much like children, little people making a big difference in the world. I think that was something that he really wanted to be able to communicate. And honestly, that's now a popular trope. Now you have stories like Star Wars, where Luke Skywalker, even though he is of course the son of Anakin Skywalker, like the chosen one, so like he has a bigger deal. But in the first Star Wars, the original Star Wars from 1977, it's Luke Skywalker. He's this dude from this backwater planet. He's a moisture farmer. and he's a kid that wants to just go into Toshi Station, pick up some power converters, and he goes from that to being a person that saves the entire rebellion by blowing up the Death Star. And then you have another trope with Harry Potter. He's just like this, he's just this dude, random dude that once again he has this. He is the chosen one, or he is the boy that lived, or he's some sort of big deal. But in the first movie or book, from what I've heard, I've actually never seen the book, so I mean, like, I just know the story from having other people describe it to me. But it comes from these humble beginnings, and that character that comes from a humble beginning to go on this great journey really has become a trope, and I believe it's become so popular because of stories like Lord of the Rings. And I think that's what Tolkien was really trying to communicate through the Hobbit characters and through their overall the race, because he loved hobbits. He loved that race that he created, and hobbits are also just there. I mean, they're 100% unique to him. Elves are something that have been used in literature for a long time. He did kind of change the formula as to how elves are used, but they have been used in literature for a long time, hundreds of years. Men, obviously, well, we have men. Dwarves are a common thing, but hobbits, that was his original thing into literature, into mythology. And I thought that was just super cool. He also created the hobbits as like an individual mythology for Great Britain, because he believed that Britain didn't have England didn't have its own mythology. Greek mythology belonged to the Greeks. Then you had Norse mythology belonged to people from like the Vikings and the Scandinavians. And a lot of those mythologies had an effect, was warped and affected into British mythology, but they didn't have their own original mythology. And so he wanted the Lord of the Rings to be that, and the Hobbits to be a English specific type of race that was created for them. So I find that to be interesting. I learned that a while ago, actually watching the appendices for Lord of the Rings for the movies, and I just thought that was so cool just to know that hobbits were so near and dear to his heart.
It is cool. I have heard a couple of things like that before, but I actually never knew about the whole like he really craved having some lore and mythology behind his own country, and I think that's really cool. So part of me wonders if that's like also how he just like was motivated to make them like just kind of these innocent, like just like everyday people. Mm-hmm. So like people that he could have been writing about, he could have been taking, notes from his neighbors, like, well, that's my neighbor's personality. Like, that's like going to be this like Hobbit's kind of personality over here. Nothing actually to back that, but I think that could have had an influence on how he was writing, in the neighborhoods and things like that. So,
right. Absolutely. And so the fact that he was able to create this entire world is amazing in and of itself. But then also he's able to create a new individual race, which is the Hobbits, and something that's so compelling. They have such a deep history in his lore, in his universe. It's amazing. But to move on to our next question, though, this is something that I was fascinated by when I first learned. The term Hobbit is actually more of a cultural title that was seemingly later adopted as the name of the race. So like the Hobbit is actually Hobbit's more of a cultural relevance rather than like there's the race of men, the race of elves, the race of dwarves. We often refer to the Hobbits as like the race of hobbits, but that's actually more of a cultural term for hobbits specifically featured around the Shire and around Hobbiton. But then if you look back into their history, they didn't go by the term hobbits. That was actually a word that was kind of like given to them through Rohan. Actually, Rohan referred to them as the halflings, and in that language it was like, let me see, it was something along the lines of, Hobbitish. They were always referred to as like names in Hobbitish, and so like it just very interesting. Like they have so much of other cultures, other races' cultures implanted within theirs, and then they just kind of ran with it, made this amalgamation of who they are, and then bada boom, they have the Hobbits. But all that to say, the Hobbit is more of a cultural title, and then it was later adopted as more of like the title for the race. But halflings in general do not all relate as hobbits. So the question is, what makes a hobbit a hobbit, if you will? What actually makes a hobbit from the Shire a hobbit that's specific to the Shire rather than like halflings that might be part of the river folk?
No, that's a great question. I think part of it. So you did mention that it was, clarified as more of like a cultural label, and I think just kind of looking at some of the stuff we've even talked about today with like some of like the innocence, some of the maybe the culture behind them, like ignorance is bliss, and like they live in the Shire. So just collecting my thoughts, but I think that really, a hobbit versus like a halfling to me would be someone who you could meet them. If you could meet them in person, you could know the difference right away. Like, I think that just from personality, I think, because of the hobbits of being like farmers, living in the Shire, just that warm personality that they all have. I think that it's kind of like a way of life type of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's also partially why they got deemed that way, is because people started to see that, and they kind of just got that label out of it. And so, yeah, I think that halfling versus hobbit is, being raised in the Shire, being under that peaceful, kind of innocent way of life. And I feel like if you were to meet true fans, if you were, even non-fans, if you were just to meet a halfling versus a hobbit, I bet you could probably tell the difference. So,
well, yeah, and so like the reason that this question actually came up in my mind was actually because of thinking specifically of how you go to Smeagol. Let's look at Smeagol and Gollum.
That's a good one. Yeah,
right. So Smeagol was actually part of in the movies himself. In the movies themselves, he's actually referenced as being something like a hobbit once. Like Frodo even says in the movies, you were something like a hobbit once. And in the books, they go into a little bit deeper understanding of what that actual statement is, what that means. Because the thing is, he wasn't a hobbit. Because, like I said, that's a cultural reference. Whereas he's a halfling, which I think is more technically. It's not widely adopted as the name of the race, but it's often used for just people within that stature. So he was a halfling, but he was known as one of the river folk. And so hobbits, what kind of makes them unique compared to the river folk is the fact that hobbits hate water. they loathe it entirely. There are some that will make small boats, and actually they're the ones that I don't know if they're from Buckland or around that area. But but there are some hobbits that will actually experiment with small boats, and the river folk were supposed to be known for like loving the water and all that kind of stuff. But most hobbits, the ones that are closer to Hobbiton, the ones that are farmers and love the fields and the small rivers, they like that stuff because they're afraid of water. They hate water, and I think it's a cultural thing compared to these river folk, which are like, no, we live on the river. We go fishing. You see at the beginning of Return of the King, when it's showing Smeagol's backstory. They're in a boat. They're in that little tiny weird saucer boat, and they're fishing in it, And so they made their living. They had their way of life centered around the water. Whereas hobbits, they're all about fields. They're all about farming. They're all about community and being able to celebrate all the time together and staying as far away from water as possible. And I think that helps with also providing a distinction between hobbits and hobbits as a culture compared to halflings as a race, if that makes sense. But
no, that's solid. I think that just that just clarifies even more kind of what we were both saying. And I mean, we didn't even touch on this necessarily, but I would bet that from dressing or like an apparel standpoint, they probably also dressed and conducted themselves very differently too. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's solid.
I think you're right, and actually, the Peter Jackson movies actually do a fantastic job of being able to show that distinction. So you see Smeagol and Deagol in the beginning of Return of the King, in the movies, excuse me, like they're wearing more of a an indigenous look, where it looks like skins from pelts that were put together in order to have more of like a frontiersman leather clothing kind of look, rather than the more sophisticated like jacket and vest of the hobbits in Hobbiton, and like the pantaloons and like all the nice stuff that they have like over in Hobbiton. That's a really good distinction. I didn't even think about that. Like 100% like how they dress, how they hold themselves, their stature. I think the hobbits, true hobbits from the Shire, really have that distinction of kind of like the show of evolution in the progression of their society, compared to these other outlier halfling tribes, if you will, and other families outside of the main Shire area, more of just being something that's more indigenous, more one with the land. But with that being said, though, last question: what famous Hobbit is your favorite, and why? And because there are a few to choose from, just purely from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, but then also like there's other ones that are referred to in those books as well.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's gonna sound like a cop out, but it's not. From day one of ever watching Lord of the Rings to now of like reading the books, I got to stick with my guy Sam. He's a fan favorite, but that's not why I'm picking him. I'm picking him because it's not necessarily the same in the movies as the books, but he, at different times in each, he really goes out of his way to ensure the safety of Frodo and really to take care of him. And a lot of times, I think, how do I phrase this? There are multiple times where Sam risks himself, and so we talked about, Frodo being bought into like the bigger cause.
Right.
I always thought that when Sam was devoting himself, Sam could care less about the greater cause. He just had that devotion and that service to Frodo. And so like, that was his best friend. That was his dude. And he wanted to ensure safety. He wanted to ensure his protection. I think, this is a bold statement, I think Sam ultimately could have cared less of what happened to the ring, just as long as Frodo was okay. And for that reason alone, like, Sam's my dude. So, how about you?
Funny enough, that's my Hobbit.
Hey,
Sam's my guy. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. And of course my name's Samuel, so that's why. No, I mean, but because of the exact same reason of his complete devotion to his friend, Frodo. And, I agree with you mostly about the fact that he doesn't care about the overall thing of the fate of the ring. He cares more about the fate of his friend. But even when he thought that his friend had died because of after the encounter with Shelob, he did pick up the ring and he was ready to fulfill the mission. I mean, that's
true. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And that's not just the movie. That's the book too. Like he picked up the ring and he picked up Sting, and he was prepared to go the distance in order to make sure that Middle Earth was saved entirely. Now he did, and when he found out, like when he saw everything going on in the outpost up on the Cirith Ungol Pass, he was like, "Oh, I gotta go check it out." And he ends up finding Frodo, and he ends up saving Frodo. So like that was really cool, And so like even when he was like, "I gotta finish this mission," he still goes out of his way to go back, find Frodo, get Frodo, and then they both together finish the quest.
How can you not love that?
That's amazing. And so Samwise is definitely my favorite. He's always just been like this man completely driven by his fierce love for his friends, and namely Frodo. But then also, I think in the movies specifically, I think Pippin is one of just the most hilarious characters. Like from Fellowship to Two Towers to Return of the King, specifically funniest moment in Fellowship, the way that he just annoys Gandalf to no end. Like, and then like he like the the head and the bucket and the helmet all go down the well, creating this huge ruckus, and then like all the orcs come after him. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And then Gandalf says,
Yeah.
"Why don't you throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity?" And it's just hilarious, you know.
Yeah.
And then Two Towers, like you see him, like Two Towers was more of Merry's opportunity to shine, going like, listen, we need to go, make sure that we're going and saving our friends. We are part of this world. But then, you know, Pippin's like, let's just go home. Our part's done now. You know, Pippin didn't have that evolution yet. And then the last movie, like that's when he finds his evolution, but not before doing a couple stupid things. You know, Gandalf once again going like, of all the curious hobbits in the world, Peregrine Took, you are the worst. and Gandalf just continues to rag on this guy. And then when Pippin feels bad about Boromir's death before Denethor, and he goes to pledge himself before him in the movie, you see Gandalf go, boom, get up, and he just like hits him with his staff, get up, and it's hilarious. But I think Pippin is probably the funnest character to watch in the movies, but Samwise, as far as the overall character and being my favorite, yeah, he's definitely my favorite. He's just such a great character.
And this would be a good talk for a different time, but I think that, so I've read, I'm just about to the end of Two Towers in the book. And so far in the book, like, he's definitely not the goofy character he was in the movies.
No.
But that would be good to like discuss for a different time. But I love it too. I think his character in the movies, it was a nice, like, little comedic relief, despite the seriousness of everything going on.
Right. You needed to have a little bit of you need to have a little transformation from book to film in order to be able to set pacing, which I feel like Peter Jackson did a fantastic job of. A lot of people would fight me on that, but we can, like you said, we can do that in another talk about books versus movies. But with that being said, we have that. I think that's all the time that we have for today. And so, Aaron, this was a fantastic talk. I feel like we got to really extrapolate.
It was great. Not bad first episode, huh?
Not bad.
Yeah.
Not bad at all. So, with that all being wrapped up with a nice little bow, we want to say thank you everybody for listening to all the way to the end. And if you're on YouTube, make sure to leave a comment below and saying like some things that you really appreciate about Hobbits. What do you really like about Hobbits in the Tolkien universe? And then also, if you want, you can drop in the comment section what would you like to see us talk about in the future? Because we would love to be able to address some of the questions that you have about Tolkien's universe in future episodes. But that is taking the comments to Isengard. This is Samuel here with my friend Aaron, and we will see you in the next one.